A barefoot child raised his hand in the nation's most exclusive boardroom. "I can solve this myself," he said. The millionaires erupted in cruel laughter, but what happened next silenced them forever. 500 million. That was the price Alexander Vance, a 2-year-old tech magnate, had paid international consultants to solve a mathematical problem that now glowed on the digital whiteboard in his 38th floor boardroom. 3 full weeks. 52 people with doctorates. 0 solutions. And now, a 10-year-old barefoot boy in patched clothes raised his hand and uttered the 5 words that would change everything. "I can solve this myself." The silence that followed was so dense that several executives stopped breathing. 12 of the country's most powerful men and women watched with expressions that shifted from confusion to disbelief and finally to pure mockery as they processed the impossible they had just heard. Cassandra Monroe, a 6-year-old biotech investor with a $400 million inherited fortune, was the first to burst into such violent laughter that she had to hold her stomach. "Is anyone else hearing this, or am I hallucinating? This is better than any comedy." Richard Sterling, a 5-year-old construction magnate, slammed the table with both hands. "Vance, where did you find this entertainment? It's pure gold." Laughter cascaded cruelly. The sound echoed against the polished glass and Italian marble walls, each echo magnifying the humiliation. But the boy did not lower his hand. His eyes, incredibly bright despite the deep circles that spoke of hunger and sleepless nights, remained fixed on the equation that had defeated the brightest minds money could buy. "Mom, what is your son doing here?" Penelope Carter, a 9-year-old real estate executive, turned toward the figure desperately trying to blend into the wall. Maria Rodriguez, a 3-4-year-old janitorial supervisor, clung to her mop with hands that trembled so violently, the bristles tapped the floor in an irregular rhythm, like an arrhythmic heart about to fail. "Mr. Vance," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the ongoing laughter. "Please, my son won't bother anyone again. My mother got sick, and I had no one to leave him with. We're leaving now. I promise this will never silence." Alexander's voice cut the air like an invisible guillotine. The laughter died instantly. Maria cowered as if the words were physical blows, her body receding until she was practically merged with the glass wall. A speck of humanity trying to disappear. "Did I give you permission to breathe in my direction?" Alexander slowly rose, each movement deliberate like a predator, spotting perfect prey. "For 6 years you have cleaned these floors. 6 years in which I never deigned to learn your name. And now you have the audacity to interrupt the most important meeting of the quarter." Each word was a psychological slap, calculated with surgical precision. The other 11 executives watched in fascinated silence, recognizing a master in his element. Maria felt burning tears form, but she held them back with a force that made her hands tremble even more. She couldn't cry, not in front of her son. She couldn't show him that the world was exactly as ruthless as she had tried to hide from him for 10 years. But Tony watched his mother shrink, and something in his expression changed. The shyness he had shown upon entering that cathedral of glass and technology evaporated like water on hot metal. It was replaced by something that made several executives feel an uncomfortable sensation in their stomachs. Pure determination, distilled from pain. "My mom doesn't have to apologize for existing," Tony said. His voice trembled, but each word rang clear as a crystal bell. "She works 12 hours cleaning up what you mess up in seconds. She comes home with cracked and bleeding hands and still finds the energy to help me with my homework." The silence that followed was different. It was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Alexander blinked, genuinely surprised. In 3 decades of building a tech empire, being absolutely ruthless, no one had ever spoken to him like that, much less a barefoot child who probably hadn't eaten breakfast that morning. "I spoke the truth." Tony maintained eye contact without wavering. "You sit in chairs that cost more than everything my family owns. You talk about problems you can't solve even if you pay fortunes. And you treat my mom like she's invisible because she cleans bathrooms." "Tony, please," Maria pleaded, her voice completely breaking. She knew exactly what would come. Immediate dismissal, an industry blacklist, months of job searching, while bills piled up like an unstoppable avalanche. "Please, sweetheart, don't say anything else." But something extraordinary happened. Instead of exploding in fury, Alexander Vance smiled. It was the kind of smile that makes smart people run in the opposite direction. A smile that promised refined, calculated cruelty, designed to maximize psychological suffering. I like this kid, Alexander announced, circling Tony slowly like a shark assessing its prey. He has character, guts. That makes what comes next much more educational. He stopped in front of the digital whiteboard where the equation glowed, a logistical optimization problem with 200 interdependent variables that had defeated 3 consultants with a combined 50 years of experience. All right, little slum genius, Alexander said, each word dripping sweet poison. You said you can solve this yourself, so I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for, an opportunity. He returned to his chair and sat down with theatrically slow movements, crossing his legs and interlacing his fingers like a judge, waiting to see an execution. But this is too boring without an interesting stake, he continued, his smile widening. So here's the deal. If you actually solve that equation, and I mean a solution that works in the real world, not scribbles from a child playing mathematician, I'll triple your mother's salary immediately. The sound that escaped Maria was half a sob, half a gasp. Triple salary meant $800 a month instead of $600. It meant being able to afford her diabetic mother's medical treatment. It meant getting Tony out of a struggling public school where negative influences were rampant. It meant maybe, just maybe, being able to buy fresh meat instead of market scraps. And not only that, Alexander added, savoring each word like fine aged wine, I'll also give her an administrative position. No more cleaning bathrooms ever again. Her own office, a computer, a business card with her name printed on it. Several executives exchanged glances. This was extraordinary generosity coming from Alexander Vance, who was legendary for paying minimum wages and squeezing every penny of value from his employees. But the next words fell like a guillotine. When you fail because you obviously will fail, because you're a 10-year-old child with no formal education, pretending to understand math that defeated MIT doctors, your mother will be fired on the spot. He paused for perfect dramatic effect. And I will personally make sure she never gets another job in this city. I will call every company, every building, every office, and tell them exactly why they shouldn't hire her. Because she brought her ill-behaved son who interrupted an important meeting and then spectacularly failed trying to pretend to be something he's not. The silence that followed was so absolute that the sound of Maria's tears hitting the marble floor was audible. No, Maria cried, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. She peeled herself from the wall and ran toward her son, but her legs trembled so much she almost fell. Please, Mr. Vance, my son is just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying. Please, please, don't gamble with our lives like this. She dropped to her knees in front of Alexander, her hands clasped in a plea that destroyed any trace of dignity. I'll do anything. I'll work 18 hours. I'll clean for free on weekends. Just please don't do this. Mom, get up, Tony said softly, coming closer and trying to lift her. Please, don't kneel in front of him. But Maria couldn't stop sobbing, her body shaken by the absolute terror of losing the only job that kept a roof over their heads. This is first-class entertainment. Leonard Payne, a 3-year-old media mogul, pulled out his phone. I'm recording this. The guys at the executive club are going to die laughing. It's unnecessary cruelty, Sophia Evans, a 37-year-old HR director, whispered, though her voice was so low no one heard her. It's education, Alexander corrected, having heard her anyway. I'm teaching the boy a valuable lesson about social hierarchies. Some are born to lead companies. Others are born to clean their bathrooms. Better he learns it now, before life teaches it to him more brutally. Tony helped his mother to her feet, hugging her as she trembled like a leaf in a gale. He felt her tears soak his patched shirt. He heard her desperate sobs and made the decision that would change both their lives forever. I accept, he said, his voice cutting through his mother's crying like a hot knife through butter. No, Tony, no! Maria clutched him desperately, trying to cover his mouth with her hands. Please, sweetheart, you can't. It's a trap. They're going to destroy us. But Tony gently pushed her hands away. He looked directly into his mother's eyes, those eyes that had seen too much pain, too much sacrifice, and said the words she needed to hear. Trust me, Mom, like Dad taught you to trust. The mention of her deceased husband made Maria let out an animal groan of pure pain. She covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing so violently her entire body convulsed. Excellent. Alexander clapped slowly, each clap echoing like a gunshot in an echo chamber. Leonard, make sure to capture every second. I want to see the exact expression on the boy's face when he realizes he just destroyed his family. Tony walked toward the digital whiteboard with steps that left almost invisible marks on the Italian marble so expensive that a single tile cost more than his family's entire monthly rent. The equation glowed before him in all its terrifying complexity. A multivariable logistical optimization problem with non-linear constraints, 200 variables, 50 interdependent constraints. Graph theory combined with advanced calculus. The kind of math that normally requires specialized software and teams of experts. And now they expected a 10-year-old boy to solve it with a whiteboard marker. "I need a marker," Tony said simply. Alexander gestured to one of his assistants, who placed a marker in Tony's small hand with an expression of genuine pity. Everyone in that room knew they were witnessing the exact moment a family would be destroyed. Some felt guilt, others felt morbid anticipation. None believed the boy had the slightest chance. Tony studied the equation. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence in the room was so absolute that the sound of Maria sobbing was the only audible thing, besides the distant hum of the air conditioning. "He's already given up," Penelope murmured. "Poor kid, he doesn't even know where to start. Give him 5 minutes to save face before admitting defeat." Richard added with something that almost seemed like compassion. Almost. But then Tony raised the marker and began to write. His movements were precise, almost mechanical in their accuracy, numbers flowing in sequences that had their own logic, mathematical symbols appearing as if he were reading them from an invisible book only he could see. The executives exchanged confused glances. What the boy was writing didn't look like random scribbles from someone pretending to understand. It looked like real math. "What is he doing?" Cassandra whispered to Alexander, leaning forward in her chair. "Wasting everyone's time," Alexander replied. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that definitely hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. Tony wrote for a full minute without stopping. Then 2. Then 3, his hand moving with a confidence that seemed impossible for his age. Equations, transforming into other equations through clear logical steps, variables being systematically isolated, substitutions appearing as if they were obvious. At 4 minutes, several executives had stood up and moved closer to the whiteboard, trying to follow what was happening. "Wait," Leonard said, his voice having lost all its previous mockery. "He's using a modified Cholesky decomposition to simplify the constraint matrix and a logarithmic transformation to linearize the nonlinear variables." Sophia added, her eyes widening with each passing second. That's exactly what our consultants should have tried." At exactly 5 minutes, Tony stopped, stepped back from the whiteboard, turned to the 12 executives, who now watched him with expressions that had shifted from mockery to confusion to something dangerously close to shock. "I'm done," he said simply. The marker fell from his hand, bouncing once on the floor before rolling to a stop at Alexander Vance's feet. Alexander looked at the marker, then looked at the boy, then looked at the whiteboard. Slowly, so slowly he seemed to be moving through molasses, he stood up. He walked to the whiteboard. His eyes began to scan what Tony had written. 5 seconds passed. Color began to drain from his face. 10 seconds. His mouth opened slightly. 15 seconds. His hands began to tremble visibly. 20 seconds. "No," he whispered. "No. This can't be. What's wrong?" Richard hurried over, followed by the other 11 executives. They all crowded around the whiteboard like moths drawn to a flame about to burn them. Their expressions changed in waves. Confusion first, then intense concentration as they tried to follow the logic, then gradual comprehension, and finally absolute shock that left several literally speechless. "This is Cassandra." Couldn't finish the sentence. "Impossible." Penelope completed for her. "This is absolutely impossible." "Call Peterson," Alexander ordered, his voice sounding hollow, emptied of all the arrogance he'd had 5 minutes earlier. "Call the chief consultant now, immediately." Tony remained motionless, watching the adults who had humiliated him, now tripping over themselves in escalating panic. His expression was calm, too calm for a 10-year-old. Maria had remained paralyzed against the wall, unable to process what was happening. Her son had actually. A minute later, the giant screen in the room lit up with a video call connecting to Dr. Henry Peterson, a 3-year-old American mathematician with an MIT doctorate who had led the consulting team that had failed for 3 weeks. "Vance, what's so urgent?" Dr. Peterson asked with clear irritation. It was 3 a.m. in Boston. "You woke me up in the middle of 'I need you to verify something,'" Alexander interrupted, his voice trembling in a way his employees had never heard. "It's critical now." The phone camera focused on the whiteboard, transmitting it to the giant screen where Dr. Peterson could see it clearly. The mathematician adjusted his glasses. His eyes began to move methodically over the equations. 30 seconds of absolute silence. 60 seconds. Doctor. Peterson's breathing had become audible through the speakers. 90 seconds. He began to murmur in German words that sounded half prayer, half curse. 120 seconds. My God, Doctor. Peterson finally whispered, his German accent becoming so pronounced with emotion that some words were almost unintelligible. Who wrote this? Who in your company has this level of brilliance that you didn't tell me about? A child, Alexander admitted, and the words seemed to be physically torn from his throat. A 10-year-old child. The silence that followed was so long that several thought the connection had been cut. Are you kidding me? Dr. Peterson finally said. A child? A child just solved in 5 minutes what my entire team, 52 people with combined doctorates, took 3 weeks to unsuccessfully attempt. Does it work? Cassandra asked, her voice having lost all its previous venom. Does the solution really work? Does it work? Dr. Peterson laughed. But it wasn't a laugh of humor. It was the laugh of someone who had just witnessed something that defied everything he thought he knew about the world. This doesn't just work. It's brilliant. It's elegant. It's exactly the kind of solution one would expect to see published in an academic journal. He moved closer to his camera, his eyes shining with an excitement that only another mathematician could fully understand. Look at this. He pointed to the screen. He used subproblem decomposition that transforms the original non-linear problem into a series of linear problems that can be solved sequentially. That never occurred to us. And here, see this? He applied the duality theorem in a way that reduces computational complexity from exponential to polynomial. In English? Richard asked, completely lost. In English, Doctor, Peterson replied, his voice loaded with reverential admiration. This child just did in 5 minutes what should have required years of advanced mathematical training. And not only that, his solution is better than anything we would have produced, even with unlimited time. The phone slipped from Alexander's hands, crashing onto the marble with a sound that seemed to mark the end of an era. All eyes turned to Tony, who stood by the whiteboard with chalk marks on his fingers, and an expression that was simultaneously triumphant and deeply, devastatingly sad. How Alexander finally managed to articulate, his voice coming out as a broken croak. How does a child from the street know math that defeats MIT doctors? Tony looked toward his mother, who watched him with an expression that mixed pride, terror, love, and pain in equal proportions. And then he uttered the words that would change everything. Because my dad was a tenured professor of applied mathematics at the state university before he was fired for exposing the dean for selling admission spots to wealthy families whose kids failed exams. The revelation fell like a nuclear bomb on the room. After he was fired, no university would hire him because he was blacklisted. No consulting firm wanted him because he had proven to be problematic. So he ended up giving private lessons to students at our house for $10 an hour. Tears began to form in Tony's eyes, but his voice remained steady. For the last 3 years of his life, after my mom had to take a job cleaning bathrooms because we were their only source of income, Dad spent every free minute teaching me everything he knew. Math, physics, logic, systems, theory. He said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from us, no matter how poor we were. A tear fell down his cheek, then another. 6 months ago, he had a heart attack while teaching. The pain was so intense he couldn't move. We called an ambulance, but no public hospital had space that night. We called 5 private hospitals, but they all turned us away when we said we had no insurance. His voice broke completely. So my dad died on the floor of our house while I held his hand, and he made me promise I would never let the world convince me that being poor meant being stupid. The silence that followed was sacred. 12 of the country's most powerful and wealthy people found themselves unable to make eye contact with a 10-year-old boy who had just exposed something fundamental about their souls. Maria slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing with a violence that shook her entire body. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of 3 years of pent-up pain finally releasing in an unstoppable avalanche. So yes, Tony continued, wiping tears with the back of his hand and leaving a marker stain on his cheek. I can solve your equation. I can solve many equations, but there's one problem I can't solve. He looked directly at Alexander Vance, with eyes that burned with ancient wisdom born of suffering. I can't solve the problem of people with money seeing people without money as entertainment. I can't solve that my mom has to kneel and beg for her job after 6 years of cleaning your bathrooms without you even learning her name. I can't solve that my dad died because having principles is more dangerous than being corrupt. His voice grew stronger, laden with every ounce of pain and rage he had been holding back. My dad was right about one thing. Knowledge can't be taken away. But he was wrong about something important. He said knowledge would set him free. But here I am, with all the education he gave me, still being treated like trash because I was born in the wrong house, to the wrong family, with the wrong bank account. Alexander Vance, a man who had built a tech empire by being ruthless in business and cruel to subordinates, who had humiliated hundreds of employees for decades, who had measured his success by how many people he could control, opened his mouth to speak and realized he had absolutely nothing to say. For the first time in 30 years, he was completely speechless. The deal was, Tony said, turning to face him directly, that if I solved the equation, you would triple my mom's salary and give her an administrative position. The silence stretched. Everyone waited to see what Alexander would do when confronted with the consequence of his own cruel gamble. And then, from the back of the room, a soft but absolutely clear voice broke the moment. I propose something better. All eyes turned to the back of the room. The woman who had spoken was Victoria Hayes, 42, and her presence there was so unexpected that several executives literally blinked as if they were seeing a hallucination. Victoria Hayes wasn't just another executive. She was the founder and CEO of Tech Vision Solutions, the only real competition Alexander Vance had faced in the last decade. Her $500 million company had risen from literally nothing. A woman who had started coding in public libraries because she couldn't afford college. No one knew she was in the building, much less in this meeting. Victoria, Alexander pronounced her name as if it were poison on his tongue. What on earth are you doing here? Victoria walked to the center of the room with steps that resonated with absolute authority. She wore a suit that probably cost as much as Maria's monthly salary, but there was something in her posture that was completely different from the other executives. She walked like someone who remembered exactly where she came from. Your assistant let me in 20 minutes ago, she explained in a calm voice that cut like a surgical scalpel. I came to discuss the merger proposal you rejected last week. But then I overheard this. She gestured toward Tony, who watched her with cautious curiosity, and I realized I was witnessing something much more important than any corporate merger. She stopped in front of Alexander, looking him directly in the eyes with an intensity that made several in the room feel the temperature drop 5 degrees. Do you know what I saw, Vance? I saw a man so blinded by his own ego that he almost destroyed the family of a genuine genius. I saw 12 people with more money than decency laughing at a child whose only crime was being born poor. Watch what you say, Alexander warned, his voice dangerously low. You're in my building, in my boardroom, and you're facing a child who just solved in 5 minutes what your $300,000 consultants couldn't solve in 3 weeks. Victoria countered without hesitation. I think your building and your boardroom lost quite a bit of credibility in the last 10 minutes. The silence that followed was so tense it hurt. Victoria turned to Tony, and her expression changed completely. The hardness melted, replaced by something that seemed like recognition mixed with ancient pain. What's your name? She asked softly. Tony Rodriguez, the boy replied, his voice still trembling from the emotional revelation he had shared moments earlier. Tony, Victoria repeated, kneeling to be at his height. The gesture was so unexpected that Maria gasped in surprise. 28 years ago, I was you. She took off her expensive jacket, revealing a blouse underneath. Then, in a move that left everyone speechless, she rolled up her sleeve and showed her left forearm. There was a long scar running from her wrist to her elbow. See this? She asked. I got it when I was 14 working in a factory, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for a pittance. The industrial sewing machine caught my arm, and no hospital would treat me without upfront payment. Tony looked at the scar with wide eyes. My mom was a cleaner, exactly like yours, Victoria continued, each word laden with contained emotion. My dad had died 2 years earlier in a construction accident that the company never recognized as their responsibility, so it was just the two of us against the world. She stood up, but maintained eye contact with Tony. The difference between you and me is that when I was your age, there was no one like me now to intervene. No one who saw my potential through my poverty. I had to scratch, fight, and sacrifice 20 years of my life to get where I am. She turned to Alexander with an expression that was half challenge, half accusation. But you, Tony, you're not going to have to do that, because I'm not going to let this man waste your talent or torture your family any further. What exactly are you proposing? Cassandra asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Another act of corporate charity for the cameras? No, not charity. Investment, Victoria corrected firmly. I propose this. Tony and his mother come to work for Tech Vision. Maria, I'm offering you a position as General Services Coordinator with an initial salary of $3,000 a month. The number hit like lightning. $3,000 was 5 times what Maria currently earned. "And Tony," Victoria continued, "I'm offering you something no one else in this room has the vision to offer. Entry into the Young Talent Development Program I launched last year. Fully paid education, personal mentors, and the opportunity to work on real projects while you study. That's theft." Alexander exploded, his composure finally completely breaking. "You came to my building to steal talent right to my face." "I'm not stealing anything," Victoria replied with devastating calm. "I'm offering opportunity to people you treated like trash. There's a difference." She turned to Maria, who was still on the floor, watching everything with the expression of someone who couldn't believe what was happening. "Maria, right?" Victoria walked over and extended her hand. "Please, get up." Maria took her hand tremblingly, allowing Victoria to help her to her feet. "Listen to me carefully," Victoria said, holding both of Maria's hands. "I know exactly what you're feeling right now. The terror of losing a job, the desperation of not knowing how you're going to feed your child tomorrow, the humiliation of having to kneel in front of men who don't know your name after years of cleaning up their messes." Tears began to fall down Victoria's cheeks, surprising everyone in the room. "My mom died cleaning a banking executive's bathroom. She was 52, but her body looked 80 from decades of work that destroyed her. When she needed urgent medical help, no one responded in time. The executive didn't come down from his office. He just called security without knowing the severity of the situation. The horror of the revelation made several executives physically recoil. So when I say I understand," Victoria squeezed Maria's hands, "it's not an empty phrase. I truly, truly understand." Maria completely broke. She collapsed into Victoria's arms, sobbing with an intensity that shook both women, and Victoria held her, allowing her to release years of pent-up pain. "But this ends today," Victoria whispered in her ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Today is the day your life changes. Not out of charity, not out of pity, but because your son is brilliant and you are strong, and those two things deserve to be recognized." Tony watched everything with tears streaming down his face. But this time they weren't tears of pain alone. They were tears mixed with something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. "This is ridiculous," Penelope interjected, her voice laden with disdain. "Victoria, you're being completely emotional. The boy solved an equation. That doesn't make him a genius." "Oh no?" Victoria separated from Maria and turned to Penelope with a dangerous expression. "Then what would make him a genius by your standards? The right last name? A private school? Parents with connections?" She walked to the whiteboard and pointed to Tony's solution. "This child just demonstrated an understanding of advanced mathematics that most college graduates don't have. He did it without a computer, without specialized software, without a support team, just his brain and a marker." She turned to all the executives, her voice rising in volume and intensity. "And you were so busy laughing at his dirty shoes that you almost missed the opportunity of a lifetime to discover genuine talent. Do you know how many times I've seen this? How many times brilliant people are ignored because they don't dress right or talk right or know the right people? Too many," she answered her own question. "Too many damn times." Alexander slowly stood up. His expression was a complex mixture of fury, shame, and something that might be reluctant respect. "You made your point, Victoria," he said, his voice strained. "But there's something you're not considering. I made a bet with the boy, and unlike you, I keep my word." He turned to Tony. "You solved the equation. You held up your end of the deal, so I'm going to hold up mine. Your mother gets triple salary and an administrative position immediately." "No," Tony said simply. Everyone turned to him in surprise. "What did you say?" Alexander asked, genuinely confused. "I said no," Tony repeated, his voice firm despite the tears that still glistened in his eyes. "I don't want you to honor the bet." "Are you crazy, Tony?" Maria exclaimed. "That's triple salary. That's everything we need." "No, Mom." Tony shook his head. "It's not everything we need. We need dignity. And accepting his offer would be like accepting that what he did was okay." He looked directly at Alexander. "You humiliated us. You made a cruel bet hoping I'd fail so you could destroy my family. The only reason you want to honor it now is because I proved you wrong. But that doesn't erase what you did." The accusation hung in the air like a sentence. "So, I'm going with Victoria," Tony concluded. "Because she's offering us an opportunity for the right reasons, not because she lost a bet." Alexander stood motionless, processing the fact that he had just been rejected by a 10-year-old boy. And then, something happened that no one in that room expected. Alexander Vance, a 2-year-old tech magnate, A man who had built an empire by being absolutely ruthless, who had never shown vulnerability in decades of his career, sat down in his expensive chair and began to cry. They weren't dramatic sobs. They were silent tears that ran down his face as he covered his eyes with one hand, his shoulders trembling with an emotion he had been burying for 52 years. The entire room froze in absolute shock. "My son was your age," Alexander finally managed to say between tears. "When I decided that building an empire was more important than being present in his life. When I chose meetings over ball games. When I lost everything that truly mattered by chasing money that never made me happy." He looked up at Tony, his face completely broken. "And now he's in another country living with his mother and hasn't spoken to me in 7 years because I became exactly the kind of man you just rejected. The kind of man who measures human value in money. The kind of man who forgot how to be human." The silence that followed was sacred. And then Tony did something extraordinary. He walked toward Alexander and extended his hand. "You can still change," he said softly. "My dad said it's never too late to choose to be a better person." Alexander looked at the small hand extended to him. Then he looked into the eyes of the child who had just rejected his offer, but now offered him something infinitely more valuable: forgiveness. And he shook his hand as he continued to cry. Alexander Vance's hand trembled as he held Tony's small hand. Tears continued to fall down his face in a silent cascade that spoke of decades of regret, compressed into a single devastating moment. But then the boardroom door burst open violently. A 37-year-old man stormed into the room with an expression of absolute fury. He wore a suit that screamed old money, and his eyes, the same steel gray as Alexander's, swept the scene with contempt that cut like broken glass. "So it's true, Damian Vance," Alexander's son and the company's executive vice president practically spat the words. "Leonard sent me the video. I thought it was a sick joke." His gaze settled on Tony with visible disgust. "But no, my father really is crying in front of some street kid who solved an equation by luck." "Damian." Alexander quickly stood up, wiping his tears with hands that still trembled. "This isn't what it looks like." "Oh no." Damian walked to the center of the room with steps that echoed like judgments. "Because what it looks like is you're about to give away company resources to people who don't deserve them." He turned to Victoria with a smile that was anything but friendly. "And you, Victoria Hayes. Of course, you're here taking advantage of my father's moment of weakness to steal talent." "I'm not stealing anything," Victoria replied with dangerous calm. "I'm offering an opportunity your father almost destroyed through unnecessary cruelty." "Cruelty?" Damian laughed, but it was humorless laughter. "My father built an empire from scratch. We employ 3,000 people. We generate hundreds of millions in economic value. And you call him cruel because he has standards?" He pointed toward Maria, who had remained frozen by the wall. "This woman cleans bathrooms. Her son solved an equation. That doesn't make him a genius. He probably cheated or got lucky. Or, enough." The voice that interrupted did not come from Victoria or Alexander. It came from Tony, the 10-year-old boy separated from his mother and walked directly toward Damian with steps that seemed too firm for someone his age and size. "You know nothing about me," Tony said, his voice trembling but not breaking. "You don't know what I've lived through. You don't know what I've lost. And you definitely don't know what I can do." "Oh, really?" Damian leaned forward, bringing his face close to Tony's in a deliberate act of intimidation. "Then enlighten me, little genius. What makes a barefoot child who interrupts business meetings so special?" Tony did not back down an inch. "My father, David Rodriguez, was a tenured professor of complex mathematics," he said, his voice gradually growing stronger. "He published 17 articles in international scientific journals. He advised 43 doctoral theses and taught me that intelligence is not measured by the money you have, but by what you do with the knowledge you possess." He paused, maintaining direct eye contact. "You inherited a company from your father. I inherited knowledge from mine. The difference is that you believe your inheritance makes you superior. I know mine makes me responsible." The silence that followed was so dense it hurt to breathe. Damian slowly straightened up, his expression shifting from mockery to something more dangerous, controlled fury. "You know what?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm going to give you a chance to prove you're not a fraud." He turned to the digital whiteboard and with quick movements erased Tony's solution. Then, using his phone, he projected a new equation onto the screen. It was monstrous, an optimization problem that made the previous one look like elementary homework. Variables, in three-dimensional matrices, nested nonlinear constraints, functions that required advanced differential calculus. This, Damien announced with cruel satisfaction, is the real problem we're working on. The one my father showed earlier was a simplified version for consultants. This is the challenge even they haven't seen. Cassandra gasped. Damien, that's classified. You can't. I can do whatever I want. Damien cut her off without looking. I'm the executive vice president, and I want to see if this miracle child can solve a real problem, or if he just got monumentally lucky on a beginner's conversion. He crossed his arms, a cruel smile returning to his face. Same rules as before. If you solve it, my father can give away company money to your family. But when you fail, because you will fail, I want you and your mother out of this building and never to return. No offers from Victoria, no second chances, nothing. This is ridiculous. Victoria exploded. Damien, that equation requires specialized software and teams of mathematicians. You're setting a child up to fail. Exactly, Damien admitted shamelessly. Because I need everyone in this room to see that my father is being emotionally manipulated by well-acted theater. Alexander finally found his voice. Damien, stop. This has gone too far. Too far? Damien turned to his father with a fury that had been boiling for years. You want to talk about too far? How about when you missed your only son's high school graduation because you were closing a deal in Singapore? Or when you didn't show up at the hospital when I had a car accident because a shareholder meeting was more important? His voice broke slightly. I spent 25 years waiting for you to see me, to acknowledge me, to tell me just once that you were proud of me. And now this kid appears out of nowhere, and in 10 minutes, he gets what I never could. Your attention, your emotion, your tears. The revelation hit the room like an emotional tsunami. Suddenly, Damien's cruelty had context. It wasn't pure malice, but pain transmuted into revenge. Tony watched Damien with an expression that had shifted from defiance to something more complex. Empathetic understanding. You also lost your father, he said softly. Only yours is still alive. The words hit Damien like a physical punch. He recoiled a step, his face losing color. You don't know what you're talking about, he murmured. Yes, I do, Tony insisted, tears beginning to form in his own eyes. I know exactly how it feels to lose someone you never truly had. My dad died 6 months ago, but for the last 3 years of his life, he was so consumed by depression from losing his career that sometimes it felt like he wasn't even there anymore. He walked closer to Damien, unafraid despite the size difference. And I know it hurts so much that you want to make others feel that same pain. Because if everyone suffers, then maybe your suffering won't feel so lonely. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it. Tears began to form in his eyes. But making others suffer doesn't bring back the people we lost, Tony continued, his voice breaking. It only creates more pain, more emptiness, more broken people trying to break others. He wiped his own tears. So yes, I'm going to try to solve your equation. Not because I want to prove I'm better than you, but because I want to prove that it's possible to choose to be different from the people who hurt us. The silence that followed was sacred. Maria sobbed silently, watching her 10-year-old son demonstrate emotional wisdom that most adults never achieve. Victoria had tears streaming down her cheeks. Even some of the most cynical executives found themselves discreetly wiping their eyes, and Alexander Vance looked at his son with an expression of absolute pain, finally understanding the damage he had caused over decades of prioritizing business over family. Tony turned to the whiteboard with the monstrous equation glowing in all its terrifying complexity. It was objectively more difficult than the previous one. Variables in multidimensional spaces, constraints that required an understanding of advanced topology, functions that normally needed powerful computers to evaluate. I need 30 minutes, Tony said simply, and absolute silence. Damien nodded slowly. His expression was a complex mixture of hope that the boy would fail and terror that he might succeed. Tony took the marker and began to write. The first 5 minutes were a transformation of the problem. Tony used a technique Dr. Peterson had mentioned earlier, subproblem decomposition, but applied in a way no one in that room had seen before. At 10 minutes, he had reduced the multidimensional problem to a series of two-dimensional equations that could be visualized geometrically. At 15 minutes, he was applying theorems that some of the executives with business master's degrees didn't even recognize. At 20 minutes, Sophia Evans whispered, "He's using Lie group theory. Where did a 10-year-old learn about Lie groups?" At 25 minutes, the solution began to take shape. It wasn't just a numerical answer. It was a complete framework that showed relationships between variables in a way that made the complex problem seem almost elegant. And at 28 minutes, Tony stopped. He stepped back. His hands trembled slightly, marked with marker ink. His forehead shone with sweat from intense concentration. "I'm done," he said, his voice barely audible. Damien walked toward the whiteboard like a man walking toward his own execution. His eyes began to scan the solution, moving methodically through each step. 5 seconds passed, his expression unchanged. 10 seconds. A furrow appeared between his eyebrows. 15 seconds. His breathing became audible. 20 seconds. He took a step back. 25 seconds. His hand moved to his mouth. 30 seconds. "It's not possible," he whispered. "What?" Richard quickly approached. "What is it?" Damien pointed to a specific section of the solution with a trembling hand. "This doesn't just solve the problem, this opens a completely new path to approach it." He turned to Tony with wide eyes. "Where did you learn about applications of group theory and non-linear optimization?" "That's frontier research. There are fewer than 50 people in the world working on that." "My dad," Tony replied simply. "Before he lost his job, he was researching exactly that. Applications of abstract mathematics to real engineering problems. He taught me." While he worked, Damien staggered backward and dropped into the nearest chair, his face completely pale. "Call Peterson again," he ordered, his voice hollow. "I need external confirmation before I believe what I'm seeing." 3 minutes later, "Doctor." Peterson was back on screen, looking even more disheveled than before, because it was now 4 a.m. in Boston. "This better be critically important, Vance," he growled. "You're waking me up every hour." And his voice died as the camera focused on the whiteboard. Silence. Long, dense, absolute. Then, "Holy hell." "Doctor." Peterson leaned so close to his camera that his face filled the entire screen. "The same kid wrote this?" "Yes," Damien replied, his voice having lost all its previous arrogance. "Then hire him immediately before another company discovers him, Doctor," Peterson said, without a trace of humor. "This isn't just correct. This is groundbreaking. This is the kind of work that appears at international conferences. This is," he paused, taking off his glasses to clean them with trembling hands. "This is the kind of work your father should have received recognition for before his career was destroyed, and now his son is completing that legacy." The connection cut, leaving absolute silence in the room. All eyes turned to Tony, who stood by the whiteboard with a marker still in hand, looking exactly like what he was. An exhausted 10-year-old boy, who had just expended all his mental energy on a challenge that would have defeated most math PhD. Squeen. And then slowly, Damien Vance stood up, walked toward Tony, and knelt in front of him. "I'm sorry," he said, tears now running freely down his face. "I'm sorry for trying to destroy you to hurt my father. I'm sorry for being exactly the kind of person he taught me to be. Cruel, calculating, unable to see humanity through a financial balance sheet." He extended his hand. "Can you forgive me?" Tony looked at the hand. Then he looked at his mother, who watched with an expression of absolute astonishment. Then he looked at Alexander, who was crying silently, watching his son finally show a vulnerability that had been buried for decades. And Tony took Damien's hand. "Only if you promise something," he said. "Anything. Promise you'll talk to your dad. Really talk not about business or companies or money, about how you feel, about what you lost, about how you can still get it back." Damien looked toward his father. Alexander looked back with an expression of desperate hope mixed with devastating regret. "Yes," Damien whispered. "I promise." And father and son met in the center of the room, embracing for the first time in years, crying together as an entire room of powerful executives witnessed the miracle of reconciliation, born from the forgiveness of a child who had lost his own father. Victoria walked over to Maria and hugged her as they both cried, watching an impossible transformation unfold before their eyes. And Tony, exhausted and trembling, finally allowed his own tears to fall freely, knowing he had honored David Rodriguez's legacy in the most important way possible, using knowledge not only to solve equations, but to heal broken hearts. The embrace between Alexander and Damien Vance seemed suspended in time. Father and son clung to each other as tears of decades of pain and distance finally found release. The entire room watched in reverent silence, witnesses to something money could never buy, genuine reconciliation. But then Alexander's phone began to vibrate once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. He separated from his son with a reluctant movement, wiping his tears as he pulled out the device. His expression changed dramatically as he read the messages flooding his screen. "No," he whispered, color draining from his face. "No, no, no." "What's wrong?" Damien asked. alarmed by the sudden panic in his father's voice. Alexander looked up, his eyes moving between everyone present with an expression of growing horror. The video leaked. The two words fell on the room like a nuclear bomb. "What video?" Victoria asked, though the tone of her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Leonard," Alexander said, turning to the media mogul with a fury that made his hands tremble. "You told me you were recording for the private group. What did you do?" Leonard Payne backed toward the wall, his face losing all trace of the arrogance he had shown before. I just sent it to our executive club chat. It was only 12 people. I don't know how. It has 3 million views in the last 2 hours, Alexander yelled, showing his phone with a trembling hand. 3 million! It's on all platforms. X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. He projected his screen onto the giant monitor in the room, and everyone watched with growing horror as social media exploded. Number, real justice. This millionaire humiliates poor child in front of his mother. Everything wrong with this video. Number, solidarity moms. Cleaning lady kneeling while her son defends her dignity. I'm crying. Number, justice for Maria. Urgent. Tech CEO exposed making cruel bet with 10-year-old child. Identified as Alexander Vance of Vance Tech Vanguard. Number, voice of the people. Meanwhile, this genius child solves in 5 minutes what $300K consultants couldn't in 3 weeks, and the millionaire mocks him. Share this now. The numbers kept climbing in real time. 3 million, 3.2 million, 3.5 million. And the comments were devastating. My mom cleans bathrooms too. This broke my heart. That kid has more dignity than all those millionaires combined. Does anyone know who the woman is? We need to help her. Total boycott of Vance Tech Vanguard. Shared. Maria staggered, holding on to Victoria so she wouldn't fall. Everyone is watching us, she whispered in horror. Everyone knows. Mom! Tony ran to her, hugging her tightly. It's okay. No, it's not okay. Now the whole country knows I clean bathrooms, Maria sobbed. They know we're poor. They know your dad died. They know everything. And they're on your side, Victoria interrupted firmly, showing her own phone. Maria, look at these comments. People aren't judging you. They're defending you. But Alexander wasn't listening. He was reading another message, this one from his public relations director, and his expression shifted from panic to absolute horror. Company stock fell 18% in the last 2 hours, he read aloud in a hollow voice. 3 corporate clients canceled contracts. 2 board members are demanding my immediate resignation. He slumped into his chair, the weight of the consequences finally hitting him with full force. 30 years building this company, he murmured, staring into nothingness. 30 years of work, and it's crumbling in real time because of 5 minutes of cruelty captured on video. Dad, Damien approached, putting a hand on his father's shoulder. We can handle this. We'll make a public statement. We'll explain that there was reconciliation. We'll show. Show what? Alexander interrupted him with a bitter laugh. That I only repented after a 10-year-old child humiliated me intellectually and morally, that I needed to be publicly destroyed to remember how to be human? He covered his face with both hands. They were right all those years. The critics, the activists, everyone who said I was a soulless monster, who only cared about profits, they were right. And now, the whole world knows it. The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. Then Tony did something no one expected. He walked directly toward Alexander, picked up his phone from the table, and began to record. What are you doing? Alexander asked, confused. Giving you a chance to tell your own story, Tony replied simply. Mr. Vance, everyone saw the worst of you. Now let them see if you've really changed. He positioned the phone to capture Alexander in a clear frame. Speak to the camera. Tell the world what you told me 20 minutes ago about your son, about your regrets, about what you learned today. Alexander looked at the camera as if it were a weapon pointed at him. Everyone in the room held their breath. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted. Tell the truth, Tony replied with devastating simplicity. It's the only thing that works. Alexander took a deep breath. Then another. His hands trembled as he clasped them in front of him, and he began to speak. My name is Alexander Vance. I am the CEO of Vance Tech Vanguard, and 3 hours ago, I committed one of the cruelest acts of my life. His voice broke, but he continued. I humiliated a cleaning employee named Maria Rodriguez. I mocked her son, Tony. I made a cruel bet, hoping to see him fail so I could destroy his family. And I did it because at some point in the last 30 years, I forgot that people are more important than profits. Tears began to fall again. I built an empire, treating employees as replaceable resources. I measured success in dollars instead of lives impacted, and in the process, I lost my own son. Damian is here today, but we went 7 years without speaking because I taught him by my actions that money mattered more than him. He looked directly at the camera. But today, a 10-year-old boy who lost his father 6 months ago taught me something I had forgotten. That knowledge without humanity is useless, that power without compassion is destructive, that success without human connection is empty. He paused, wiping tears with the back of his hand. Tony Rodriguez solved not one, but 2 mathematical equations that defeated teams of expert consultants. He did it in minutes, with just a marker. Using knowledge that his father, a brilliant professor whose career was destroyed for exposing corruption, taught him before he died because they couldn't afford medical care. His voice grew stronger, laden with emotion that was impossible to fake. And when that child had a chance to get revenge on me, when he could have taken my money and spit in my face for humiliating him, he offered me forgiveness. He extended his hand. He taught me that it's possible to choose to be better than the people who hurt us. He stood up, walking toward where Tony held the phone. So this is what I'm going to do. Effective immediately, Vanstech Vanguard will implement a talent development program, regardless of socioeconomic background. Any employee, from cleaning staff to executives, who demonstrates exceptional skills, will receive fully paid education and an opportunity to advance. Damian looked at him in surprise but nodded in support. In addition, Alexander continued, I am establishing the David Rodriguez Scholarship Fund in honor of Tony's father, $50 million over 10 years for brilliant students whose families cannot afford education. Maria let out a sob that was half cry, half laugh of disbelief. And I am personally committing to rebuilding my relationship with my son, to learning the names of all my employees, to remembering that every person who works for me has a story, a family, dreams that deserve respect. He looked directly at the camera with an intensity that pierced the screen. I'm not doing this for PR. I'm not doing this to save my company's stock. I'm doing this because a child held up a mirror to me, and I didn't like the monster I saw reflected. And if I'm going to live the rest of my life, I want to do it as the person my mother would have been proud to know. Tony stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Victoria began to applaud slowly at first, then with more force. One by one, the other executives joined in. Even those who had participated in the original humiliation found their hands moving in applause that recognized something rare, genuine transformation. Send it, Alexander told Tony, to all platforms. I want the world to see this. Tony nodded, and with small but steady fingers, he began uploading the video to Vanstech Vanguard's official account. As they waited for it to process, Cassandra Monroe's phone began to ring. She answered with a confused expression that quickly transformed into shock. It's the national news, she announced in a trembling voice. They want to interview Tony and Maria live right now. What? Maria pallid. I can't. I don't know how to talk on television. You don't have to know how. Victoria took her hands. You just have to be yourself. Tell your story. Let the world see your dignity. But my clothes. Maria looked down at her cleaning uniform in shame. They're perfect, Victoria interrupted firmly. Those clothes represent years of honest work. Years of sacrifice for your son. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Tony walked over to his mother, taking her hand. Mom, Dad always said, the truth doesn't need a disguise. It just needs courage to be told. Maria looked at her son, this extraordinary child, who had inherited not only his father's brilliance, but also his wisdom, and felt something fundamentally changing within her. For years she had carried the shame of her poverty like a crushing weight. She had bowed her head, she had made herself invisible. She had tried not to exist too loudly, but her son had no shame. He had dignity. He had pride in the knowledge he had inherited. He had the courage to stand in front of millionaires and remind them of their humanity. And if he could be brave, so could she. Okay, she said, her voice trembling but not breaking. We'll do the interview. 15 minutes later, the boardroom had been transformed into an impromptu studio. Television cameras pointed toward Maria and Tony, sitting together on a sofa that probably cost more than everything they owned. The journalist, Jason Miller, 51, and nationally recognizable, watched them with an expression of genuine respect. We're live in 3, 2, 1. The red light came on. Good evening, Jason began, his voice projecting calm authority. Tonight, we have an extraordinary story that has captivated the nation in the last 4 hours. A video showing the humiliation of a cleaning employee and her son by millionaire executives went viral with over 5 million views. The screen behind him showed snippets of the video: Maria kneeling, Tony defending his mother, the mathematical solution, the final embrace between Alexander and Damien. But what makes this story unique, Jason continued, is that it didn't end with humiliation. It ended with reconciliation, transformation, and perhaps hope. He turned to Maria. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I know this has been an incredibly difficult day. Can you tell us how you felt when Mr. Vance made that bet with your son?" Maria swallowed, her hands clasping Tony's. "I felt absolute terror," she admitted, her voice trembling but clear. "Not only because I might lose my job, which is the only thing keeping a roof over our heads, but because I saw in the eyes of those men exactly what my husband warned me about before he died." "What did he warn you about?" "That the world would measure our son by the money we had instead of the knowledge he possessed, that people would see his patched clothes before they saw his brilliance, that we would have to fight 100 times harder for half the recognition." Tears began to fall down her cheeks, and in that moment, seeing Tony standing in front of that whiteboard while powerful men laughed at him, I thought my husband was right. I thought we had lost before we even started. "But your son didn't give up," Jason observed gently. "No." Maria smiled through tears, looking at Tony with pride that lit up her entire face. "Because he's braver than me, stronger than me. He has his father's courage to stand up to injustice and say, 'No more.'" Jason turned to Tony. "Tony, the world has seen your mathematical brilliance, but what has truly captivated millions is your compassion. When Mr. Vance offered you an apology, when his son challenged you, when you had multiple opportunities for revenge, you chose forgiveness. Why?" Tony thought carefully before answering. "Because my dad taught me that revenge is a seed that grows a tree of bitterness. He said that when someone hurts you, you have two choices. You can hurt them back and create an endless cycle of pain, or you can choose to break that cycle by being different." His voice strengthened. "Mr. Vance was cruel, his son Damien too. But when I looked at them, I didn't see monsters. I saw broken people who had forgotten how to connect with others. I saw a father and son who had lost each other. And I thought, if my dad were here, what would he do?" He paused, tears glistening in his eyes. And I knew he would have extended his hand, because that's what good people do. They don't wait for others to be good first. They choose kindness even when the world gives them reasons to be cruel. The silence in the studio was absolute. Even the cameramen had tears in their eyes. Jason had to take a moment to compose himself before continuing. "Your father, David Rodriguez, was a university professor. Can you tell us what happened to him?" And Tony told the full story. The exposure of corruption, the dismissal, the blacklist, the years teaching at home for $10 an hour, the heart attack, the hospitals that rejected them. And as he spoke, the entire country listened. In homes across the country, families gathered in front of televisions. Single mothers working 3 jobs cried, recognizing their own struggle. Unemployed fathers saw hope. Children learned that being poor does not mean being less. Social media exploded. "This kid is the future we need. Someone needs to protect this family now. My daughter just told me she wants to be like Tony when she grows up." And then something extraordinary happened. The video of Alexander asking for forgiveness began to circulate, slowly at first, then like an avalanche. And the conversation changed. From "destroy the cruel millionaire" to "this is what real redemption looks like." From "total boycott" to "let's give him a chance to prove he's changed." From "all rich people are monsters" to "maybe some people really can transform." As the interview ended, Alexander's phone rang. It was his public relations director, and his voice was a mixture of shock and relief. "The stock is recovering. Clients are withdrawing cancellations. The board of directors just voted unanimously to support you." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible hours finally lifting from his shoulders. But more important than the stock, or the clients, or the board, Damien was standing next to him, and for the first time in 7 years, father and son faced the world together. 3 days after the interview that had captivated the nation, Tony Rodriguez found himself standing in front of a building he had never imagined visiting, the headquarters of Tech Vision Solutions, Victoria Hayes' company. It wasn't Vanstech Vanguard's imposing cold skyscraper. It was a modern, 1-0-story structure with glass walls that let in natural light, vertical gardens covering an entire section, and at the main entrance, a plaque that read, "Talent has no zip code." Maria held his hand with a grip that spoke of nervousness and excitement mixed. For the first time in 6 years, she wasn't wearing a cleaning uniform. Victoria had sent her 3 professional outfits as a welcome gift, and now she wore a gray suit that made her look exactly like what she was about to become, an executive. "Are you ready, Mom?" Tony asked, squeezing her hand. "No," Maria admitted with a nervous laugh. "But we're doing it anyway." The automatic doors opened, revealing a lobby that was completely different from any corporate space they had seen. Employees of all ages and backgrounds worked in open spaces. There was a play area for children in one corner because Victoria believed parents worked better when they knew their children were safe and nearby. There was a cafeteria where food was subsidized, so everyone could afford to eat well. And on the walls, huge photographs of employees with their stories written underneath. Maria, former domestic worker, now director of operations. Chen arrived as a refugee not speaking English. Now leads a development team. Robert left school at 14 to work. Completed college at 35 with our program. "Welcome." Victoria appeared from the elevators, smiling with genuine warmth. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a 6-8-year-old woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with sharp intelligence. She used a cane, but moved with a dignity that filled the space. Maria, Tony, Victoria made the introductions. "I want you to meet Eleanor Carter. She's our Director of Human Development and the reason this company exists." Eleanor extended her hand to Maria with a smile that held deep understanding. "Victoria told me your story," Eleanor said in a soft but firm voice. "And it reminded me of my own story. 40 years ago, I also cleaned offices while raising 3 children alone." Maria felt tears forming immediately. How she began to ask, "How did I get here?" Eleanor completed the question. "With a lot of hard work, a lot of luck, and eventually finding someone who saw my potential instead of my position. Someone like Victoria, someone like you now have the opportunity to be for others." She guided Maria and Tony toward the elevators, while Victoria walked beside them. "Your office is on the 5th floor," Victoria explained to Maria. "You'll be coordinating our new hidden talent identification program. Basically, your job is to find more people like you, employees in service positions who have unused skills." The elevator doors opened on the 5th floor, revealing an open space filled with people working. And when Maria entered, something extraordinary happened. Everyone stood up and began to applaud. Maria stopped dead in her tracks, completely confused. "What? These are 53 employees who started exactly where you started," Eleanor explained, her voice laden with emotion. "Cleaning, security, cafeteria, maintenance. They were all discovered, trained, and promoted. And they all saw your story and wanted to be here when you arrived." A young woman about 25 years old approached, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Rodriguez," she said in a trembling voice, "2 years ago, I cleaned these floors. My son is Tony's age, and when I saw your video, when I saw your son defending you with such dignity, I showed my son and told him, this is how you should be, brave, proud of who you are, no matter what the world says." Another woman, this one about 40, approached. "I worked in a hospital cafeteria. I served coffee to doctors for 15 years while I had a psychology degree that I could never use because I needed to work full-time. Victoria found me 3 years ago. Now I run the employee wellness department." One by one, they shared their stories, and Maria realized something fundamental. She was not alone. She had never been alone. There was an entire army of people who had walked exactly the same path from invisibility to recognition. "Your office." Victoria opened a door, revealing a beautiful space with large windows, a modern desk, and on the wall, a framed photograph. It was a photo of Maria and Tony from the interview day. Maria still in her cleaning uniform, Tony holding her hand, both looking at the camera with unbreakable dignity. Below it, an engraved plaque read, "Dignity is not bought, it is defended." Maria covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing. "I want that every morning when you walk in here," Victoria said softly. "You remember where you came from, not with shame, but with pride. Because that path, that difficult, painful, humiliating path is exactly what qualifies you for this job. No one understands better how to find hidden talent than someone who was invisible." As Maria explored her new office, Victoria took Tony to another area of the building. "Your situation is unique," she explained as they walked. "You're 10 years old, so obviously you can't be a formal employee, but we have something special for you." She opened a door to a room filled with technology. State-of-the-art computers, digital whiteboards, laboratory equipment that gleamed with infinite possibilities. And sitting at tables working on projects were 12 children, aged between 9 and 15. This is our Young Geniuses program, Victoria explained. Exceptional children who, like you, have talent that surpasses their age. They come here after school, work on real projects with professional mentors, and learn skills no traditional school teaches. A boy about 12 years old looked up from his computer, his eyes widening. "Are you Tony Rodriguez?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "The kid who solved the optimization equations?" Before Tony could answer, all the other children stood up and surrounded him, asking questions in an excited avalanche. "Is it true you did it in 5 minutes? Did you really use Lie group theory? Did your dad teach you all that? Can you help me with my algorithms project?" Tony found himself laughing, a genuine laugh he hadn't felt in months, as he answered questions and observed the projects these extraordinary children were developing. There was a 9-year-old girl named Isabella, programming artificial intelligence to help people with visual disabilities. There was a 4-year-old boy named Raphael, designing a low-cost water purification system for rural communities. There were 1-year-old twins, Matthew and Luke, creating an app to connect students with volunteer tutors. "They all have something in common with you," Victoria explained as she watched. "They all lost something important. A parent, financial stability, access to traditional education, but they turned that pain into purpose." She knelt in front of Tony. "Your father, David Rodriguez, was brilliant, but more than that, he was good. He exposed corruption knowing it would cost him his career. He taught students for almost nothing because he believed knowledge should be accessible, and he gave you an education no money could buy." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Now you have a decision to make, Tony. You can use that gift just for yourself. Go to the best school, get a better life, escape the poverty, and no one would judge you for that." She paused. "Or you can do what your father would have done. Use your talent to lift others, teach what you know, inspire children like these who need to see that it's possible to survive loss and still shine." Tony looked around the room. He saw children who understood exactly what he had lived through. Children who knew the pain of loss, but had chosen to create instead of destroy. "I want to stay here," he said. "I just want to learn with them and teach them what my dad taught me." Victoria smiled, wiping away tears. Then, "Welcome to the team." That afternoon, as Maria finished her first day, meeting her team and reviewing profiles of employees with hidden talent, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Rodriguez," a voice on the other end, was formal but kind. "I'm Dr. Patricia Green, director of San Rafael University Hospital. I'm calling because we received notification that the David Rodriguez Scholarship Fund established a health program for beneficiaries' families." Maria felt her heart accelerate. "As part of that program," the doctor continued, "we want to offer you complete medical coverage for you and your son, free of charge, retroactive to 6 months. Which means," her voice softened, "which means your husband David's medical treatment debts would be covered. The hospitals that rejected him that night are now contributing to the fund that covers families like yours. It's our way of saying we're sorry for not being there when you needed us." Maria collapsed in her new chair, in her new office, crying tears that were half pain for what she had lost, half relief for what she had just received. "Miss Rodriguez, are you okay?" "Yes," Maria managed to say between sobs. I just needed to hear that. I needed to know that his death wasn't completely in vain." "It wasn't," the doctor replied firmly. "The David Rodriguez Fund has already helped 30 families in 3 days. Your husband is saving lives even after passing on." When the call ended, Maria sat in silence, processing the impossibility of the last 72 hours. 3 days ago, she was cleaning bathrooms while fearing losing her job. Now she had an office, a team, a purpose that went beyond just surviving. And her husband, her brilliant, principled, self-sacrificing David, was finally receiving the recognition he deserved in life. A soft knock at her door. "Mom?" Tony entered, still excited from his time with the other genius children. "Are you okay?" he asked, seeing her tears. Maria opened her arms, and he ran into them, hugging her tightly. "I'm more than okay," she whispered into his hair. "Your dad would be so proud of you. So incredibly proud." "You think?" "I know so. Because I'm proud, and because you're doing exactly what he did. Sharing knowledge, helping others, choosing kindness when the world gives you reasons to be harsh." She pulled back to look him in the eyes. "Do you know what's most extraordinary about these last 3 days?" "What?" "That you didn't change. Everyone around you changed. Millionaires learning humility, companies changing policies, a country having conversations about dignity and talent. But you remained exactly who you are, David Rodriguez's son, who believes people deserve respect regardless of their bank account. Tony smiled. That smile that was half child, half old sage. Dad said character is what you do when no one is looking, but now everyone is looking. Then let's give them something worth seeing, Maria replied, standing and taking his hand. And mother and son walked out of that office, on the first day of their new lives, ready to honor the legacy of a man who had taught them that knowledge without compassion is useless, that success without humanity is empty, and that true treasure is not hoarded. It is shared, multiplied, and lives forever in the lives it transforms. 2 weeks after Maria's first day at TechVision, something unexpected happened. Alexander Vance appeared at the building's reception without an appointment, without assistance, without the armor of arrogance he had worn for 3 decades, just vulnerable, human. "I need to speak with Tony Rodriguez," he told the receptionist, in a voice that trembled slightly. "Please, it's important." The receptionist, who had seen the viral video like everyone else in the country, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution before making the call. 15 minutes later, Tony came down from the 5th floor with Victoria walking protectively beside him. "Mr. Vance," Victoria said, in a tone that made it clear she was evaluating every word he said. "This is a surprise." "I know," Alexander replied, looking directly at Tony. "And I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but I came because I need to ask you something." Tony studied him with those eyes too old for his age. "What do you need?" Alexander took a deep breath, like a man preparing to jump off a cliff. "I need you to teach me." The silence that followed was absolute. "Teach you what?" Tony asked, genuinely confused. "How to be a better person," Alexander replied, and tears began to form in his eyes. "How to remember to connect with people, how to see humanity before seeing profits, how to be the kind of man my son can respect and my mother would have recognized." He wiped away tears with the back of his hand. "For 2 weeks, I have implemented all the programs I promised. The David Rodriguez Fund is working. The talent development program has identified 43 employees with unused skills. Company policies have changed." He paused. "But I realize something. I can change policies without changing my heart. I can donate millions without truly understanding why it's important. I can do everything right externally while still being a monster internally." He looked directly into Tony's eyes. "And you, a 10-year-old child who lost more than I can imagine, showed me how to forgive, how to choose kindness over revenge, how to maintain dignity even when the world tries to take it away." His voice broke completely. "So I ask you, please, if there's any way I can spend time with you, learn from you, understand how you see the world, I need it. Not for my company, for my soul." Tony looked toward Victoria, who nodded almost imperceptibly, leaving the decision completely in his hands. "Okay," Tony said finally, "but on one condition. Anything you also bring, Damien? Because what you need to learn isn't just how to be a better person. It's how to be a better father, and that needs both of you." Alexander let out a sob he had been holding back. "Yes, absolutely yes." And so began the most unusual arrangement any company had ever seen. Every Saturday afternoon, Alexander and Damien Vance came to TechVision. Not for business meetings, not for negotiations, but to sit in a room with Tony and the other 12 children from the Young Geniuses program, listening as they shared their projects, their dreams, their perspectives on the world. The first Saturday was awkward. The children didn't know how to behave around the famous millionaire whose humiliation video half the country had seen. But Tony broke the ice with his characteristic honesty. "Mr. Vance," he said in front of everyone, "these children have also lost important things, parents, homes, opportunities, but they all chose to create instead of destroy. So if you really want to learn, listen to them. Not as you listen to employees, but as one human listens to other humans." And Alexander listened. He listened to a 9-year-old girl named Isabella explain how her AI project for visually impaired people was born because her grandmother had gone blind, and the available systems cost thousands of dollars her family would never have. He listened to 1-year-old twins, Matthew and Luke, describe how their tutoring app connected students from struggling schools with volunteers because they remembered not having help with homework and seeing their mother cry in frustration for not being able to help them. He listened to a 14-year-old named Raphael explain that his water purification system came about after his younger sister became seriously ill from contaminated water in their rural community. And with each story, something changed in Alexander. The layers of cynicism he had built over decades began to crack, revealing the humanity he had buried under ruthless ambition. Damien was also transforming. Sitting next to his father, listening to these extraordinary children, he began to understand something fundamental. True success is not measured in accumulated money, but in lives impacted. The fourth Saturday, Alexander did something that surprised everyone. He brought 12 Vanstech Vanguard executives, including Cassandra, Richard, and Penelope, and asked them to listen too. "I need you to understand," he told them before the session began, "that we have been operating a company completely backward. We have been measuring success by how much we take from the world instead of how much we give." And when those executives listened to the children, when they saw brilliance without arrogance, ambition without cruelty, intelligence paired with compassion, something changed in them too. Cassandra approached Isabella after her presentation. "My pharmaceutical company," she said, her voice trembling, "spends millions on research that only benefits people who can afford expensive medications. What if we invested that money in low-cost solutions like your project?" Isabella looked at her with wide eyes. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Cassandra replied, tears streaming down her face. "I want my company to be part of the solution instead of the problem. Would you help me?" One by one, the seeds planted in those Saturday sessions began to grow into entire gardens of transformation. A month after that first Saturday, Tony received an invitation that left him speechless. The state university, the same university that had fired his father David for exposing corruption, wanted to award him a special prize. "I don't want to go," Tony told his mother that night. "They destroyed Dad. Why should I accept anything from them?" Maria sat next to him on the sofa of their new apartment, spacious, bright, in a safe neighborhood where Tony could play outside without fear. "Do you know what your dad would say if he were here?" she asked softly. Tony shook his head, tears forming. "He would say that institutions are made of people, and when people change, institutions change. He would say that rejecting their award would be easy, but accepting it with dignity, standing in front of them and reminding them who your father was and what he stood for, that would be brave." She paused. "And your dad always chose bravery over ease." So Tony accepted. The ceremony was in the university's main auditorium, filled with 400 students, professors, and administrators, the same people who had allowed David Rodriguez to be destroyed for doing the right thing. The dean, a new man who had arrived 2 years after David's dismissal, went up to the podium with an expression of genuine shame. 5 years ago, his amplified voice began, filling the auditorium. This university made one of the gravest mistakes in its history. "We fired Professor David Rodriguez for exposing corruption in our admissions system." The silence was absolute. Not only did we fire him, we blacklisted him, destroyed his career, and directly contributed to the stress and financial hardship that ultimately cost him his life. Tears began to fall down his face. "We cannot undo that. We cannot bring him back. But we can honor his memory by doing what he would have wanted. Choosing integrity over convenience, truth over politics, people over profits." He gestured toward a giant screen that showed a photograph of David Rodriguez in his prime, smiling in front of a whiteboard full of equations, surrounded by students who clearly adored him. Today, this university announces the David Rodriguez Institute of Applied Mathematics. It will be dedicated to research that benefits communities, not just corporations, to accessible education for students, regardless of economic resources, to upholding exactly the principles for which David Rodriguez gave his career. He turned to where Tony was sitting in the front row next to Maria. "And we want to ask his son, Tony Rodriguez, to be our youth ambassador, to constantly remind us why we exist, not to produce wealthy graduates, but to produce good humans who use knowledge to heal the world." The entire auditorium stood in a standing ovation that lasted a full 5 minutes. Tony went up to the stage on trembling legs, Maria walking beside him because she couldn't let him face this alone. When the applause finally subsided, Tony approached the microphone. "My dad used to say," he began, his voice trembling but not breaking, "that institutions are not buildings. They are the decisions that the people inside those buildings make every day." He looked around the auditorium. "This university made a decision to fire my dad because he stood up for what was right. That decision shattered my family. My mom had to clean bathrooms. I had to watch my dad, a brilliant man who loved to teach, give lessons in our living room for $10 an hour. And when he had a heart attack, we couldn't afford treatment that could have saved him. The silence was so dense it hurt. But today, this university is making a different decision, a decision to admit error, to honor my dad's memory, to ensure that no other professor is punished for having principles. Now, tears streamed down his face. So, I accept to be a youth ambassador, not because I have completely forgiven, but because my dad taught me that revenge builds walls, while forgiveness builds bridges. And we need more bridges. He wiped away tears. But I want to be clear. I'm going to constantly remind you who my dad was. I'm going to make sure his name is on every project, every scholarship, every decision this institute makes, because he deserves to be remembered not as a victim, but as a hero who chose integrity when it cost him everything. The ovation that followed was deafening, and in that moment, in that auditorium, full of people who had failed David Rodriguez in life, but now honored his memory in death, something miraculous happened. The legacy of a fired professor became a movement that would change an entire university. 3 months after the ceremony, Tony turned 11. There was no big party, just an intimate dinner in their new apartment with Maria, Victoria, Eleanor, the 12 children from the Young Geniuses program, and to Tony's surprise, Alexander and Damien Vance. Alexander arrived carrying a large box wrapped in plain paper. "I didn't know what to get you," he admitted with uncharacteristic shyness. "What do you give to a child who rejected millions of dollars because he valued dignity over money?" Tony opened the box carefully. Inside was an object that made his breath catch. David Rodriguez's personal strongbox. The small blue metal box where his father kept his most cherished possessions. Maria gasped. "How did you get this?" "We sold it 2 years ago when I bought it from the flea market," Alexander explained, tears in his eyes. "I was tracking anything connected to David Rodriguez because I wanted to understand who the man was whose son taught me everything about humanity. I found it, I bought it, and I kept everything that was inside." Tony opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were David's treasures. Photographs of his wedding to Maria, drawings Tony had made when he was 5, handwritten notes from grateful students, and making Tony cry immediately, a sealed letter with his name. To Tony, "Open when you need to remember who you are." With trembling fingers, he opened the envelope. His father's handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Tony, if you are reading this, it probably means I'm not there to tell you in person, and that breaks my heart because there is so much I still want to teach you. But if I taught you well, you already know the most important thing. That knowledge without compassion is a weapon, that power without humility is tyranny, that success without integrity is empty. The world will try to convince you that being poor means being less. It will measure your worth in the money you have, instead of the character you possess. It will offer you shortcuts that compromise your principles. Don't take them, my son. Choose the hard path. Defend the invisible. Use your brilliance to lift others, not just to lift yourself. And when you have power someday, because you will, because you are extraordinary, remember what it felt like, not to have it. Your mom is the strongest person I know. Take care of her. Honor her sacrifice by being exactly the man she is raising you to be. And finally, forgive me for not being there. Forgive me for dying when you still needed me. But know this, every second I spent teaching you was the best invested second of my life. You are my pride, my joy, my living legacy. I love you more than words can express. Dad. Tony read the letter 3 times, tears soaking the paper before he could speak. I did what you said, Dad, he whispered to the letter, as if his father could hear him. I used the knowledge you gave me. I defended Mom. I chose forgiveness over revenge. And now your name is helping hundreds of families. Maria hugged him as they both cried. Victoria joining the embrace, then Eleanor, then all the children, until it was a giant mass of people hugging, crying together, healing together. And Alexander Vance, a man who 3 months earlier had been a monster of cruelty, found himself crying too, but no longer out of shame, but out of gratitude, because a 10-year-old child had taught him that it is never too late to choose to be different, that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, that true treasure is not kept in $3 million strongboxes. It is shared, multiplied, and lives forever in the hearts it touches and the lives it transforms.